Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing Game 7 of the regular season between the San Jose Sharks and the Montreal Canadiens, in which the Sharks have lost 4-3. Now 3 losses in a row as Montreal comes into San Jose, wins their first game in San Jose in this millennium, and get revenge on what the Sharks did to them just over a week ago when they shut out the Canadiens 5-0 by shutting out the Sharks by a score of 4-0. Now this wasn't for a lack of trying from the Sharks. While early on in this game, it wasn't necessarily much of a great performance from the San Jose Sharks, that they weren't either outplayed by the Canadiens. From about the halfway mark onward, the Sharks were just absolutely peppering Jake Allen, Montreal Canadiens goaltender, with shots and fantastic opportunities. These weren't just, random shots from the point to pad that stat. No, these were some great opportunities that the Sharks just got absolutely zero good luck with, zero good bounces, and so the Sharks couldn't even get a single goal on the board, and they made Jake Allen look like currently not playing Canadiens goaltender Carey Price. So this one started off kind of like how the past couple of games for the Sharks have started off. While they didn't give up a goal in the first minute or two of this game, they would give up the first goal. It would be Mike Hoffman scoring for the Canadiens to make it 1-0, and that score would hold until the end of the first period. The Sharks would again get a couple of power plays like they've been getting in the past couple of games, but haven't really been able to bury any of their pretty decent chances on those power plays over these past few games. Into the second period, the Sharks would still not have any luck beating Jake Allen, but the Canadiens would have much more luck on their end beating Adin Hill, and would get one from Alex Romanov to make it 2-0, and then eventually their first power play goal of the entire year from Brendan Gallagher to make it 3-0 after 40 minutes. In the third period, the Sharks really started to push, kind of like how they had been doing over the past couple of games. It's kind of unfortunate that the Sharks really are only waking up in the latter half when they're already trailing a couple of goals instead of actually starting the game with this amount of energy. But even though the Sharks pushed, as I said, nothing came of it, and Josh Anderson would score the empty netter to put this one away. The Sharks actually going for the aggressive pulling of the goaltender with about 3 minutes left, down by 3 goals, and they actually got a couple of very good chances. There was a nice passing play that eventually led to a Logan Couture chance all alone in the slot, but kind of a microcosm of how that game had been going. Logan Couture just fires it way wide of the net and is unable to bury it there. So the Sharks, as I said, 4-0 lost, 3-game lose streak in a row after they started this season with 4 straight wins, and moved to a record of 4-3. On to the lineup. We start off with the Meyer, Couture, and Dahlin line. I've talked so much good things about this line over the first 6 games of this season, but for the first time of the year, these 3 players did not necessarily have that great of a game. Actually, I should correct that. I didn't think Logan Couture and Timo Meier were all that great here tonight. They weren't bad, certainly, but based to their previous performances over the past 6 games, they definitely underperformed. I will say, however, that Jonathan Dahlin continued to impress me here tonight, had some great opportunities, probably could have scored at least a goal or 2 in this game if he had a bit more luck, or if Jake Allen was just a bit less sharp. And just generally the first line, not a huge impact in this game, or at least not as big as they had. It was actually the Sharks' other 9 players, which is actually somewhat nice to see, a lot of them, who actually were getting a lot of the great chances, just unable to convert past Jake Allen. And starting off on the second line, we do have William Eklund, who I tweeted out during this game I felt after 2 periods was the Sharks' best player of the night, and after 3 periods, I don't think I've really wavered on that. Eklund had so many nice setups, just as he did in the previous game against the Nashville Predators, had even a couple of great chances for himself, and it wasn't just the finesse type of passing plays that we had seen in that previous game, but he was also doing a lot of these simple things correctly, just getting simple shots to the net. If there's one thing that I will criticize William Eklund for, is I think he has to work a bit on his shot. He had like 3 or 4 pretty decent shot opportunities in this game, and he took those shot opportunities, which is what you'd like to see from these younger players who will sometimes look to overpass. But the problem is that the shots never really were great, kind of not aiming for any particular corner, just right at Jake Allen. So not necessarily fantastic. Hopefully he can get a bit of work onto that, because he has shown to be a very shifty player and had a fantastic game here tonight, I will say. Joining him on his line was also Rudolf Balcers, who I really haven't been all that impressed with thus far this season. Besides that first game where he got a goal against the Winnipeg Jets, he has otherwise been kind of average to below average throughout most of the rest of the season up to this game. But here tonight, he definitely made an impact. Definitely was also benefiting a lot from the fact that William Eklund was kind of setting him up for like 2 or 3 fantastic opportunities. But you do have to give a lot of credit to Rudolf Balcers anyway in this regard. Definitely his best game of the year, just couldn't bury on any of those chances. Moving on to the third line, I was a bit surprised by this line actually shaping up. I thought that they were going to go for a bit more of an offensively oriented third line, as we saw a line at the end of last game, which was Weatherby, Eklund, and Barabanov. Barabanov did not end up playing this game, which I'll get to a bit later. But the third line ended up with Cogliano being bumped up from the fourth to the third, joining both LeBanc and Bonino. And I was kind of wary of how this line would actually manage to look in this game. I thought it would be kind of, powerless in terms of offensive capabilities, because Bonino hasn't shown a ton offensively thus far this season. Neither has really Cogliano, especially at even strength. And so I didn't really think LeBanc could necessarily carry this line, considering he's never really shown himself to be a carry on any sort of line at all. However, this line definitely surprised me here tonight. Bonino looked a lot more engaged offensively, Cogliano as well, and LeBanc honestly was probably the player on this line who I was the least impressed, which was, as I said, not really expected. I thought Bonino and Cogliano a lot of great chances, LeBanc not so much, but in general, it was a pretty decent game for this third line. Now moving on to the fourth line, as I said, Barabanov got benched for this game. I was not surprised that Gadjevich managed to force his way back into the lineup, because I thought the one game he did play earlier for the San Jose Sharks was really good, but I was surprised because it was actually Matt Nieto also stepping out of the lineup, but he was injured for that reason. But I was somewhat surprised to see Lane Peterson get back into the lineup over Barabanov. I would guess that Booner rathers Peterson on a fourth line role compared to Barabanov, but from what I've seen this season with Lane Peterson, usually when you say, I'd rather this player in a fourth line role compared to somebody else, it's usually because you rather them in sort of defensive roles. But Lane Peterson this year thus far has not really been impressive at all defensively, so I was kind of surprised to see this, considering Barabanov, while he wasn't super good in the couple of games he's played thus far this season, he will offer more to the team than Lane Peterson would. Here tonight, I don't think Peterson was terrible, but I don't think there was necessary, the Canadiens put him in a position where he could look terrible in this game. Generally, I just didn't really think he did all that much, and so while Gadjevich had an okay game and Weatherby was kind of invisible, I would say at times, I would hope to see once again Peterson, nothing against him, but him to kind of step out of the lineup a bit and let Barabanov come back in and maybe bring a bit more of an offensive element for the Sharks, because that has been something that's been lacking over these past couple of games. Basically, it's been, at the first 4 games of the year, it was the Sharks' first line carrying the vast majority of the Sharks' offense, while the bottom 9 players kind of floundered a bit. The Sharks needed those players to actually step up sooner rather than later, because eventually that first line was going to stop scoring at that insane pace that they had been, and that's exactly what's happened over these 3 games, and the Sharks haven't really been able to pick up the slack with these other 3 lines on their team, and I think going with Peterson over Barabanov is kind of not helping your case there. On to the defensive side of things, interestingly enough, we start off with Ferraro and Burns, who probably were the Sharks' worst defensive pairing here tonight. I thought Burns in particular, while he actually had some decent looks offensively, looked once again, for maybe it's the second or third straight game at this point, quite lost defensively. I was not really impressed with Brent Burns at all in the defensive zone. And remember, it was a few games ago where I talked about how Brent Burns is very rarely beat in ice time as a San Jose Shark, because he plays in every single situation and he's so trustworthy, at least in Bob Booner's eyes. But here tonight, he actually did get beat. It was only by about 15-20 seconds, but it was actually Erik Karlsson of the second pairing who had more ice time than Brent Burns, and rightfully so. Erik Karlsson not only looked much better than Brent Burns defensively, but was even better than Brent Burns at the offensive side as well, even though Burns wasn't even all that bad in that particular piece of the game. Erik Karlsson was skating the blue line insanely well. He was making some very nice zone entries, just carrying the puck in himself. Defensively, he wasn't making so many risky plays like we have seen in the past few games from Erik Karlsson, honestly all season that we have seen from Erik Karlsson. He was well supported by Jacob Middleton, his partner, as usual. And just generally, I thought Erik Karlsson was likely the Sharks' best defenseman here tonight, looking very, very good. But in the end, I guess it didn't matter because the Sharks 0 goals on the board. And when it comes to this third defensive pairing, one thing I do want to mention does have to do with Radim Shemek. As I've mentioned a few games ago, Shemek has begun introducing a lot more offensive tools to his game, which is something that we are not necessarily used to seeing from Radim Shemek. And it's kind of a way because he's playing with Vlasic, who of course is a defensive defenseman, so you want to try and get some sort of offensive capabilities on that pairing. The problem here that I see with Shemek is that this offensive introduction has come at the expense somewhat of his defensive game. There were a couple times, especially in the first period, I would say, where Shemek made some just real textbook defensive errors, I would say. I think as the game went on, second and third period, Shemek definitely picked things up and actually ended up looking quite solid. But in that first period, it felt as though he was much more offensively oriented, kind of looking like a baby Brent Burns, I guess you could say, and was just abandoning a few too many defensive assignments. So one thing that I do find interesting is that Santeri Hataka has started the season with the San Jose Sharks, but he was in the press box since game 1. Jacob Middleton ended up taking that 6th spot and has impressed in that regard. So Santeri Hataka has been in the press box the entire year, and I suspect the Sharks will try to introduce him at some point because it feels kind of weird to take a player who was as promising as Hataka was during the preseason and just not have him play any games. I don't know why they're not just sending him to the AHL at this point instead of having him sit in the press box for multiple weeks, but we'll see if eventually he gets into the lineup. I don't know if they'll swap out Shemek or if they'll swap out Vlasic. I would guess just based off of name brand alone that it would end up being a Vlasic-Hataka pairing. But actually, in my eyes at this point, I wouldn't be too mad if it ended up being a Shemek-Hataka pairing for, the future games, if that is to happen. And then finally, to talk about the goaltending, Adin Hill here tonight. Back when the Sharks had Martin Jones, which was, of course, just as recently as last season, the problem with Martin Jones was that when it came to those good chances that the other team would get, Jones would frequently let in those types of goals, 2, 3, 4 goals a night, just in terms of high danger chances alone. And then on top of that, a big problem with Martin Jones is that he would also let in the low danger chances. He would let in 1 or maybe even 2 low danger chances per game, and just generally wouldn't really give the Sharks on most nights a great chance to win. When it comes to both Adin Hill and I guess to a lesser extent James Reimer, but I'm going to focus more on Hill for tonight's game since he played tonight's game, he's actually been pretty solid in the high danger opportunities. I mean, in the third period, the Sharks were pushing super hard, getting a ton of great chances, but because of the fact that they were committing so hard to the offensive style, they actually gave up a few opposing chances for the Canadiens themselves. And Adin Hill, I think it was maybe on 2, 3, maybe even 4 golden opportunities for the Canadiens, came up with big saves to allow the Sharks an opportunity to come back in this game, which is a great thing. Thumbs up to Adin Hill for that position. But early in this game, when you take a look at these actual goals scored by the Montreal Canadiens, this first one from Mike Hoffman stems from a huge problem that we talked about about Adin Hill since the preseason, from when he played just his first game as a San Jose Shark, which was his rebound control. And while in the first few games of this year and back in the preseason, the Sharks did a very good job of cleaning things up in front of the net, there's not always going to be a Sharks defenseman there to bail him out. So yes, you can say, well, Hoffman should have been covered by a Sharks player. Obviously, that is indeed the case. But it's also the case that Adin Hill needs to be able to control the rebounds better so that he doesn't send the puck straight to the stick of Mike Hoffman for that easy tap-in goal. Well, I guess it technically wasn't a tap-in goal. Adin Hill recovered decently well, and Hoffman just kind of deked him out. But generally, needing better rebound control. And then when it comes to the second goal of this game from Romanov, this is just low danger of the low danger chances. This is a shot from the point. I don't believe this got deflected at all. It wasn't even through all that much traffic. It just kind of fooled Adin Hill, and that's just not a goal that you can be letting in situations where your team is already trailing. Honestly, in any situation, you can't be letting in a goal like that, but it's just so weird to see because, I should mention that the third goal was not really Adin Hill's fault at all, but it's so weird to see that he makes such great saves on some of these fantastic opportunities early in this game. Actually, you could point to as well in the first period, Suzuki with a golden opportunity for the Montreal Canadiens to get an early 1-0 lead, and it was Adin Hill who completely robs him in that situation. But then when it comes to these easier saves, he just ends up getting beaten. So I don't know if there's maybe some sort of focus problem here for Adin Hill, but it is something that the Sharks will hope that he cleans things up. He's been mostly solid thus far in this brief sample size that the Sharks have had this season, but there have just been one too many soft goals from Adin Hill than I would like to see. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Saturday, where they would take on the Winnipeg Jets as well for the second time this season. This was the Sharks' first opponent of the entire year. They had beaten the Winnipeg Jets by a score of 4-3 in that home opener, and they'll have another opportunity to do so and try and break out of this losing streak when that comes. Class dismissed.